in the market. And the purpose for doing all these strategic decisions is to maximize the payoffs or maximize the values that you can achieve from a certain or specific outcomes. And of course, because you're not sure what outcomes are likely to happen, then you have a wide range of possible outcomes that could occur. So if you recall the prisoner dilemma schemes, where we have two people, two individuals, they start discussing and collaborating in stealing money from the bank, right? So that's the idea about prisoner dilemma schemes. And then these two prisoners were arrested by the policemen, right? And they were sent to the interview room separately. However, before that, these two individuals they discussed with each other, saying that, well, let's say that we commit not to reviews, that we steal the money from the bank, then both of them will get the best possible outcomes, in which policemen there's no evidence to put them in the prisons for long times, or the sentence would be lighter. However, if one of them's defect, this means that they report and review to policemen that, well, we have done that, and I now tell you the truth, and don't know whether in the other rooms there the others, let's in this case the collaborators, would actually commit to what they promise. Is this does the words, these oral words binding or not? He's not sure, right? So the strategies or the plan of actions for playing the games will become interesting because we don't know what others would be doing. And with this uncertainty and also the imperfect informations, it leads to a strategic decision, and you have to make an inferences in such a way that can minimize your own cost or maximize the payoff. And even your knowledge and your assumptions of other decisions, you can come up with an optimal strategy. So what does mean by optimal strategy? It means that the strategy that allowed players or individuals or firms that can maximize their expected payoff. So it's very important for you to remember this is why we use the words expected payoff. It's not only payoff because you're not sure, right? It's just what you expect. And if even this is what the expected payoff is, you going to employ a corresponding strategy. So for instance, if I believe that my competitors are rational, so what do I mean by rational here? Rational, according to the classical economics theory, rational means that competitors or individuals or firms follows the profit maximizing objective, right? So that's the economics payoff, not in terms of non-economic payoffs or non-financial incentive, because there will be several decisions or actions which will be influenced by non-financial incentive as well. So we don't take that part into account when we say my competitors are rational. So rational just means that your competitor work and do everything, make any decision just to maximize their profit. So they are driven by financial incentive only. So, given your knowledge about the competitors, that they are rational and therefore they aim to maximize their own payoff only. So, how should I take their behavior into account when making my decisions? So, I know that my competitors will maximize their profit. They will determine this, let's say, this amount of units of output that they will produce in order to maximize their own payoff. So I take that information, put it on the table, and now I will make the decision on how many unit of product I will produce, and how I price my product will based on the information I have. Normally, in the environments where the information is imperfect, this means that you don't know exactly how many units of product will be produced by your opponent or by your competitor. So you make an assumptions. Let's say in the first quarters of the years, the competitors will produce X unit of output. Then, even X units of output that you predict your competitors will produce, you will produce Y unit of output. But in case in another scenarios that your competitors produce Y unit of output which Y greater than X, then you should revise your plan for numbers of unit that you're going to produce. So that's what it means by strategy and the rules of plans of actions when playing a game. And with this optimal strategy, of course, they try to maximize the profit, and that will be the expected payout because we are unsure about what others will be doing. So as you can see, determining this optimal strategies will be very difficult because it's less likely you have already information about your competitors' decisions and under what conditions complete symmetric and perfect information. This is really an ideal situation. So you're less likely under conditions where you get all the informations. So it's like you walk through the tunnel where you always need to make an assumptions based on a very general knowledge you have about your competitors. And it's make the games become interesting because you're trying to find out among different situations or different scenarios. Let's say firm X and firm Y will make strategic decisions to maximize their own profit, given the knowledge they have about others. So at the end of the day, what will be the optimal strategy follows by firm X, given the knowledge he has about firm Y's decisions and vice versa. And this is one critical questions we're going to answer in the chapters. So then how should we analyze and we come up with, we analyze on the scenarios and how can we come up with an optimal strategy after studying the chapter. So I take an examples and the realities where let's say there will be an auctions. So auctions mean that let's say you are farmers and the government now trying to encourage farmers to adopt some sustainable farming practices, right? Uh, for instance, they will set some part of their land for conservations. And as you know that normally the farmland will be used for agriculture productions. So they generate income, or income come from agriculture productions. And agriculture productions with its intensivity will cause environmental problems. So many residuals coming from fertilizer, pesticides, and the government now come up with an idea that, well, if we just encourage people, like let's say farmers, could you please adopt sustainable farming practices? How many farmers will take initiative in doing so? So that's less likely the case that they're going to do it, because if they set the land aside for conservations, or they reduce the quantities of fertilizers and pesticides they use for their productions, it might affect the productivity, and it might affect the um, quantities of output they could achieve after relative to their competitors. So second thing is there will be an opportunity cost. As you can see, if farmers set the land aside for conservation, this means that they do no things on their land, right? They just leave the land to the nature, so that the land has some time to recover, soil qualities can be improved. But in the returns, farmers will require compensations from the government, right? Otherwise, they're less likely to do so because they incur the cost by losing the incomes from agricultural productions. So in this case, the money is paid by the government to support farmers in setting the land aside for conservations. How the government could determine how much they should compensate farmers. Let's say per hectare, farmers set their land aside for conservations. How much farmers would be willing to accept, right? So determining this compensations amount shouldn't be achievable, or shouldn't be achievable, because not everyone, or not all farmers has the same opportunity cost, right? Opportunity cost measured by the incomes from agricultural production. So if you plant the trees or plant the crops, let's say wheat, rice, barley on your farmland, then you receive the incomes from agricultural productions. Now, if you set that your land aside for conservation, use your land, you don't do anything on your land anymore, you will lose that income. And therefore, the opportunity cost of setting the land aside for conservations will be equal to the incomes from agricultural productions. So the opportunity cost per hectare setting the land aside, the land set aside for conservations will be the agricultural incomes can be generated from that hectare it is under production. So in this case, the minimum amounts of compensations the government should pay farmers should be equal to agriculture's incomes that farmers can gain from each hectare of farmland. However, back to the question we used to discuss some times ago, that how can the government have the information about the opportunity cost of setting land aside for conservations within adjacents? Because the opportunity cost setting the land aside for conservations will vary across farmland. And due to this heterogeneity, it's really challenging for government to really come up with an amount of money that they plan to compensate farmers if farmers take the land aside for conservation. It's a very tricky task. In order to show these problems, they can think of auctions as a tool to elicit or to get the information about how much farmers would be willing to accept for setting the land aside for conservation. So in this case, when the auction runs, let's say you were some farmers and you agree with participating in a conservation auctions because normally these kind of programs like conservation auctions or any environmental programs, farmers are asked to voluntarily participate, right? It's not compulsory. You cannot force people to participate in an environmental programs, adopt green behaviors. You can't. That should be voluntary. But the question is, because you know that's voluntary, so how can the conservation auctions mechanism should be designed in such a way that it can attract maximum numbers of participants or maximum numbers of participating farmers in conservation auctions. So in this case, farmers would place in a bid, right? If you agree to participate in the conservation auctions, then you should submit your bid. And normally, if the auction is designed at a sealed bid auctions, what does mean by sealed bid auction? This means that you the bid submitted by each individual or each participant will be totally concealed. So others won't know how much others farmers are asking for compensations. So that's what they call silvic conservation auction. In some auctions, you can you can see that this is a reviews auctions where people keep raising the bid, and for example, there will be some product, let's say um, an ancient vase, flower vase, or a picture of the landscape, beautiful landscape, and is this kind of products is will be auctions. And when is this auctions? Is trying to collect the information about how much people would be willing to pay, right? So there will be a different way of eliciting the informations. On the one hand, in the example of farmers, auctions was used to elicit willingness to accept by farmers for setting their land aside for conservation. And in the example I just mentioned about auctionings, one type of product like pictures or an antique flower vase, then in that case, the auctioneer is trying to collect the information about willingness to pay. So there's the same auction mechanism, but it can be designed in such a way that allows auctioneer to elicit either a willingness to pay or willingness to accept. So let's back to the example of the conservation auctions. Then in this case, farmers will submit a bid, right? So if you were some farmers, my questions is, how do you formulate your bid? Or in other words, what informations you think you will take into account in determining how many, let's say how much you would be asked for the bid, for put in the bid, equivalent to the amount that you would be happy to set your land aside for conservation. What informations? How do you make decisions as a farmer in this case? Any ideas? No, why no one say anything? So what information, if you was farmers, what information do you think you can use to make up your mind about the beat? Các em có cần cô nói lại bằng tiếng Việt không? Sao im ra vậy?